Okay.
Welcome to Tony at 12. I'm Tony LeBlanc, and today I'm in conversation with Isabel Picornell, and we're going to talk about the up-and-coming Alderney Literary Festival. Welcome.
Thank you, Tony.
What number is this? How many have we done now? Or you
This
done?
this is the 7th.
Oh,
So we started in 2015 and we've missed 2 out
yeah.
in 2020 and 2021.
Which
So
was the dreaded COVID, of course.
yeah. I
Yeah,
remember in 2020 we canceled it 1 week before
yeah.
the festival.
Anyway, everything looks shipshape this time round. Tell me, who are your sponsors for this particular festival?
Well, our overall festival sponsor is Polygon Collective,
Yeah,
who've been very generous, allowing us to extend the festival a bit longer. So it now starts on the Friday morning. So that's brilliant. And then we have individual author sponsors for the individual authors. And let me see, I hope I haven't missed anybody out. We've got Alderney Electricity. We've just got HSBC, who've come on board. Savills in Guernsey. The Liberation Group, we know and love. Ravenscroft, who is also the overall trust umbrella sponsor. And they sponsored us last year. Julius Barr, who also sponsored us last year. We have private sponsors, Nigel Mayer and Susan Smythe. We've got another Alderney AY. Oh gosh, I can't remember.
doesn't matter.
You know what? This is absolutely terrible. I can't remember who.
Anyway, you're obviously
Roberts.
you're very grateful to all of them.
We are indeed.
Now, tell me about the dates.
17th to the 19th of March. So Friday, 17th of March to Sunday at 12:30, the 19th of March.
Okay. And are tickets on sale now?
Excuse me. Yes, they are. And they're very nearly sold out. So people can still buy online from the website at alderneyliterarytrust.com or from the Alderney Visitor Center.
Okay, that's really good.
And if anybody is after Rover tickets, we've just had 2 returns. So they're precious, like gold dust.
Now, of course, this isn't going out till Friday, so they'll probably have gone by then. So fair warning to the viewers, fair warning. And of course, the venue, as ever, will be in the Island Hall, in the Anne French room.
That's right, the same old. I know people say that we need to expand it and go bigger, but really, it's this nice salon feel that we want to keep going. So, Anne French room it is.
Yeah, and the main thing is, Isabel, as long as you can produce enough revenue through the tickets and the sponsors to make it work on a fairly small basis, I think it's a lot more intimate.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of having the sponsors.
Yeah.
And what we're also having this year is we're having three fringe events, and these are all book clubs.
Yeah.
So we've got book clubs. Shall I give you some information on it?
Yeah, please do. I've got a list of authors here that we were going to run down in any case.
Okay.
Are the book clubs separate to that?
Yes, they're in addition to the program.
Okay. Tell us about those.
So, I'll talk about them when we talk about the authors, but they're totally free and they're in various venues in town.
Oh, okay, that's good to know. Right, well, let's kick off with the authors because there are an awful lot of them, and we've got obviously a bit restricted on time. But first of all, Anthony Riches, he's the chairman of the Literary Festival and a committee member of the Historical Writers Association. So he's going to obviously chair it, and I think you've got an opening panel on the festival theme with Helen Caster and Sean Lusk.
That's right. So the festival theme is mistaken history, historical narrative versus historical truth, because as all historians know, that you may have truthful facts, the individual facts being truthful, but when it's put together to create a narrative, it doesn't always result in a truthful narrative. There's always an angle to the narrative, and as a result of interpretation, the narrative may not be as accurate as the individual facts within it. And so this is going to be discussed in the opening panel. Tony Riches is leading it with Helen Caster, historian, and Sean Lusk, historical fiction writer.
It's interesting. The quote is, "The humblest narrative is always more than a chronological series of events." I suppose we have to point the finger at Shakespeare on that one, do we?
No, actually, it's somebody I can't remember writing on
no, not the quote, the way in which he interpreted the history.
Yes, yes, of course.
Yeah.
It's it's always subject to interpretation. This is the problem with history, is we lose a lot of the reality.
Yeah.
As time passes, and so when you have to reconstruct from the facts, we don't actually know completely why things happen or what people thought, and this has to be reconstructed from the few facts we tend to have in history.
Of course, looking forward, if we were speaking about this 100 years in the future, there'd be a lot more recorded history about the 2020s than there would have been about the 1820s, because of course it's all digitalized and everything else, isn't it?
Yeah, but I wonder how much digital information, how long it survives. I don't know. This is the problem. At least with ancient history, you've actually got written records.
Yeah.
What's the storage life of digital records?
I think I know. I think I know a man that probably does know. Right, let's get on to a little bit more about the authors. And the first one after the opening panel is a guy called Andrew Taylor, and he's going to be talking about the shortcomings of history.
Yes, well, people may not have known that Andrew Taylor has actually written some of the Bergerac scripts for television.
Yeah.
But in this particular talk, he's going to be talking on his latest book, which is part of a series called The Ashes of London. And this is set in London in the months and year immediately after the Great Fire, 1666.
Yeah.
And so he will be talking about the difficulties of recreating credible characters based on the few facts we know about real people at that time, and making it relevant to readers in the 21st century. So this will be interesting. It's largely on thrillers and financial crime. Even then, in the 17th century.
Oh, we had tulips and all sorts of things to contend with in those days, didn't we? So nothing's new. What about Christina Ezrahi? She's going to be talking about, now this is quite interesting, she's going to be talking about uncovering Soviet crimes.
That's right. Christina Ezrahi is coming from Berlin. She is a historian of Russian culture and history, and she will be talking about a ballerina, a ballet dancer called Nina Anisimova, which most people will never have heard of. But she was a soloist for the Kirov Ballet in the war years, World War II years, and was accused of being a Nazi spy. So on the basis of that accusation, she was shipped off to the gulags. And this is a story of her survival and her comeback.
Yeah.
She came back to eventually be the first Russian female choreographer, ballet choreographer. But what's very interesting about this talk will be how the Russian mentality or Soviet mentality at that time continues to the present day, which explains a lot of Putin's behavior in the Ukraine war.
Yeah.
So another fascinating talk, which I'm looking forward to.
Right. And so we go from the extreme left to the extreme right, but with Julia Boyd, who's got a book out called A Village in the Third Reich.
This is the story of a small village in southern Germany from about the end of World War I to the end of World War II, but told entirely through local news, local newspaper of this village, local diaries, parish council minutes. And this book was recommended to me when I was in Düsseldorf last year teaching, and I read it on the train and I was hooked because I read about this little village, 2,000 people, and I was reading Alderney. The same issues that tourism, building, housing, everything that affected this little village resonated with me. And it is very, very interesting because it tells you how complicated humans are. And so we think of Germany in World War II, everybody supporting Hitler, everybody a bunch of Nazis. And it's actually a lot more complicated than that, because you had, like, for example, the mayor of this town, Oberstdorf, was a Nazi, yet he protected the Jews.
Yeah.
So you had people supporting Hitler because he promised, to bring back prosperity after all the hardships of inflation, stagflation, everything after World War I. Yet the people who supported Hitler did not support Nazism. So it's a very complicated picture, and this book brings it out beautifully.
Continuing on a sort of contemporary theme to World War II, is it Jose or Josie Day?
Do you know? I don't know. I'm thinking it's Josie.
I'm seeing that accent.
Yes, it's in the Josie.
Anyway, to be advised,
female.
plus Mr. Ken Tuff, who was a former greffier in Guernsey and an occupation historian, and they're going to be talking about the People's Messenger, Louis Guillemot. That's an interesting one, I would think.
It is, and Josie is Louis Guillemot's daughter.
Right.
So this is the diary of Louis Guillemot, who worked for the Guernsey state at that time. He was the go-between between the states of Guernsey and the German civil administration. And it was very interesting because all the communications had to be in writing and in German.
Right.
So when the states wrote to the Germans, it had to be in German or in English and then translated to German. The Germans replied, it was in German and had to be translated in writing to English. And Louis kept a diary every day during the war. And so this is a fly in the wall view of the workings of the cooperation, collaboration, whatever you want to talk, of the dealings between the German civil government and the states of Alderney, the states of Guernsey at that time. Eye-opening.
Because the trouble is, of course, if you are occupied, you have to have somebody to run the civil authority. And, whilst you might say up to a point he was collaborating with them, I think he was there surely to make sure that the machinery ran as smoothly as possible.
I agree. And I think the word collaboration has taken on a negative meaning,
Yeah.
which I wouldn't, when I'm talking about collaboration, yes, it is so both civil administrations trying to make the lives of people bearable within the context of the occupation.
Yeah.
And but the complexity, people forget about the complexity of this, because it's not just a collaboration between so the Germans and the and the Gurns.
Yeah.
This is about also the complexity of two different cultures, and of also, however it was the German civil administration, it was still military occupation.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're learning, or we're picking up through this festival, is that things are never as simple as or as black and white as they might seem in history,
Mm.
when we're looking back over 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, 1,000 years. There's always a lot of layers of complexity to it.
I guess in the context of Mr. Guillemot, probably rather than collaboration, cooperation would have been a better way to describe it.
Yeah, I don't really see a difference between the two.
Well, only that collaboration, is a dirty word.
Yeah, yes, it's taken on a negative connotation.
Yeah, but there we are. Right, continuing, Anna Sieber, the story of Ethel Rosenberg, the short life and great betrayal of a young American wife and mother. Now, this is all to do with the atomic bomb, isn't it?
Yes. So this is set in USA in the 1950s, the McCarthy era.
Mm-hmm.
There is hysteria over communism, and the US government attempted to root out what it saw was Reds under the beds everywhere.
Yeah.
As part of their campaign, if you want to call it like that, they executed Julius and Ethel Rosenberg, a Jewish couple, for being communist spies. Now, that's been the story since 1953 when they were executed. Anne Seba, who we've had before, she came with a very good biography of Wallace Simpson, has reopened the research. And this is the first biography of Ethel Rosenberg on her own, without her husband. And this is quite problematic, because Anne's conclusion is that Ethel was not a spy, and that she was executed by the US government because it was politically expedient to do so. It suited them.
It was a very short trial. It was a very short trial. Yeah.
That's right. And information which would have exonerated Ethel Rosenberg was ignored.
Mm.
And this book has been vilified in some quarters in the USA. But I've read it, and I think it deserves to be aired. There is new interpretation, new information, one including the fact that the US's star witness actually perjured himself, and the US government knew this. So again, another story with layers of complexity.
Is it fair to say the husband was a spy?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. And the suggestion being Ethel must have known about it or suspected it.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make her a spy either.
Yeah. It's one of those situations where, she was guilty by association.
That's right. And left behind two young children, under 7 years old, who had to be fostered.
Okay, moving on. Nicholas Jubber. Is that the pronunciation?
Another one, I don't know.
Right.
I'm
Okay.
saying Juber, but
Okay. Juba, Jabba.
your guess.
We'll certainly have it right by the time you get round to the festival for the introductions. And this one is the fairy tellers, the history behind the tales.
This, yes, Nick Juber has traveled the world in search of the origins of our modern fairy tales. And what's fascinating about this is where they originate from, where we least expect it. And many of them have moved around well, at least from Asia to Europe via the trade routes. And there are many different versions of the same fairy tale, depending on which country you go to. And this is what Nick then explores. Where does it come from? Who told the first tale? What's the cultural origins? How is it's ended up, let's say, in Europe or in the UK with a particular version? For example, Cinderella and the Glass Slipper. Its origins are in China. The glass slipper, which only fits a very small foot, is tied in originally with the Chinese practice of binding feet. But as it's traveled the trade routes from Asia to Europe, it's then, being retold and reframed to suit a different audience. So these are the stories behind fairy tales. And incidentally, Nick Juber will be talking to the school kids in St. Anne's School on the Friday morning on this subject, which incidentally they're also studying in school.
So to that end, can we say that he takes a look at Grimm's fairy tales?
He does.
Yeah.
As well. Grimm's fairy tales, if I remember rightly, reading the book, has very different origins. What I'm remembering is actually the Grimms didn't invent them, but collected them from people who may have invented them for the Grimms. So you have these different cultural origins.
But the Grimms were sufficiently compos mentis to say they're our fairy tales.
Yes, well, it was trendy at the time.
Yeah.
This began as a trend of collecting folklore, local folklore, and it was trendy across Europe. For who knows the reasons that trends happen. But you had the same with Hans Christian Andersen.
Sure. Yeah.
The same things, and also with and I can't remember the name, but there is an English individual who also collected these tales.
And it's quite incredible how these have been developed into movies, thinking of Snow White, Walt Disney, etc., etc. And also, of course, in the pantomimes.
Yes. Well, it's in the pantomimes. Who was it? I can't really think. You have who's this character that's permanently forever beating her husband, or Widow Twankey, or so, I can't remember. All those sort of things. And that's where the fairy tales originate from.
Yeah, it sounds quite fascinating, actually. Let's go on now to, I can actually pronounce this one, A.K. Blakemore. And he's the author of 2 full-length collections of poetry, which is quite interesting, which was obviously pretty popular. But he's going to be in conversation regarding the Manningtree Witches.
Yep, it's Amy Blakemore.
Yeah.
She's a poet.
I beg your pardon. I got the gender
Manningtree
wrong.
Witches is her first book.
Right.
And the language is beautiful. You can tell she's a poet.
Yeah.
Reading. I mean, it's the pictures she paints are just so vivid. It is a novel based on the trial of these 7 women. And the trial is actually based on the actual transcripts. But what she tries to do is build a picture of them, of who they were before the trial.
Yeah.
And they were largely old women, poor families living in the fringes of town. Some of them were healers, and all these sort of lives that made respectable people suspicious of them.
Yeah.
And so when the witch hunting trials, swept across the UK, these were the first women who were then picked up and suspected or accused of being witches. And it's really interesting when you read the evidence that was coming out, and you think, how is it that people actually believe this rubbish? But they did, imps
Yeah.
flying
Yeah.
cats. And what's really interesting is I was reading just an article the other day on the trial of the last witch in England. And the same sort of evidence that was put forward for them being witches in the Manningtree witch trial was also put forward in this last trial. And one of them was she flew through the air, on her broomstick. And the judge ruled that flying through the air on a broomstick was not a crime. So you can see how it starts,
Yeah. It gets out
lawyers
of hand,
start
doesn't it?
being
Yeah.
skeptic.
It's that
But she
lovely.
was convicted in the
Yeah.
end.
Yeah.
But
It's that lovely word prejudice, isn't it?
yes, and
Yeah, it's
superstition.
dreadful from that point of view. And of course, they used to have those dipping stools, didn't they? Stick the
Yes.
witch on the dipping stool. If she went into the pond and drowned, she was innocent. And if she came up still alive, then they executed her in any case. So
Yes.
witches did not have a good
No,
deal, in my view.
no.
But there we are.
Absolutely.
There we are. Next one, Carl Graves. He's a director of the Egypt Exploration Society, and he's looking at a situation 1,000 miles up the Nile with and by Amelia Edwards. Goes back to 1873, and thought to be somebody that was very important in terms of Egyptology.
Yes, Amelia Edwards is responsible practically single-handedly for changing British Egyptology
Yeah,
today. The way we look at it, our enthusiasm with it, the impetus behind Lord Carnarvon, and the funding the Tutankhamun excavations, etc., etc. So Amelia Edwards was one of these well-to-do Victorian women who didn't have very much to do other than decide one day she's going to go on a riverboat up the Nile for the next 6 months with her companion. And along the way, she wrote a travelogue. And more importantly, she did a lot of watercolor paintings.
yeah,
And last year, the Egypt Exploration Society reprinted the book on the 140th anniversary, but this time including the watercolors in color. So it's a very entertaining book of the attitudes of a bunch of English travelers, on a couple of boats going up the Nile, and their attitudes towards the Egyptians, which was not good,
yeah, yeah,
what's interesting is they seem to consider the ancient Egyptians as being a much superior race to the modern Arabs,
yeah,
who they denigrated, and they're it's very entertaining. Also, today we would say, it is not politically correct, their attitudes, but
quite, yeah,
it's the attitudes of the time. And Carl is going to talk to us um, this book, how and why it was written, and how we should view Amelia Edwards' attitudes,
yeah,
cultural beliefs
yeah,
at the
yeah,
time. But
yeah,
nevertheless, however we may think about her, she is responsible for British Egyptology today, because she went on to found the Egypt Exploration Society, which continues and carries on its research to this day.
I'm afraid the old clock's ticking away, and we've only got about 6 minutes left. So can we do brief one on Helen Castor, Joan of Arc, a history? I mean,
yeah. So Helen Castor looks at the original history of Joan of Arc, stripping away the myth of the saint and whatever other myths, and looks at the evidence for the real person behind the myths. We've been trying to get Helen Castor over here for 5 years, and she's finally coming.
And then we come on to Sean Lusk, who was going to be, of course, in the initial panel, and he's talking about Out of Time, the strange death of the Levant Company. What's that all about?
So Sean Lusk is another of our debut novelists. I have to say, I forgot to say that A.K. Blakemore, Amy Blakemore, is the other one.
Yeah.
Sean's new book, her first book, is called The Second Sight of Zachary Cloudsley, which is set in England in the 17th century and 18th century, in England and Constantinople. And this is the Levant Company was the precursor to the East India Company.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So the Levant Company was the same idea as the East India, but it was working. It managed the trade between England and the Middle East.
Yeah.
And for some reason, it just died. Whereas the East India Company, which was coming up, just went on to a huge success.
Yeah.
And so looking at taking his book, which is it's magical realism, but it's based really on the craze at that time for mechanical automatons, of which the Turks were importing in huge numbers, and clocks, for example, from the UK. And so this dips into that craze and then looks at, well, why was the Levant company so unsuccessful?
Incredible. And the last one. Now, you're going to help me with the pronunciation.
I did ask her. It's blues.
Jackie Blues.
Guernsey
lady.
Jackie Bluesy.
Yeah. A Guernsey lady who is writing about the French house set during World War II in Guernsey.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah.
So the French house is Victor Hugo's house.
Well, right. Okay. Yeah.
This is the story of it's really a love story, but it's based on the life of her great-grandfather.
Yeah.
And the housekeeper of Victor Hugo's house at that time, which was already a museum. And basically the German interest in Victor Hugo, well, all things cultural there. So it's her debut novel, and she wrote to us saying, would you consider this book, read it? And me hating love stories, I thought, oh God. So I read it, and I tell you, about a third of the way in, I fell in love with it. Beautifully written, very well told, very vivid in bringing the life of Guernsey of that period to life for us.
And a local lady.
And a local lady, now lives in Brighton.
Yeah. Oh, right. Okay. Was a local lady.
Was a local lady.
Well, it's great to hear that your ticket sales are well up and everything's going hunky-dory from that point of view. I'm sure a lot of the people that will be watching this video will find it very, very interesting. And I would like to thank you very much for sparing me some time. And perhaps we can make a date next year.
Oh, next year. for the 2024. Oh my God, let's get this one over with.
It's ticking away, I'm afraid.
Can I very quickly mention the book clubs?
Yeah, please do. Yeah. We've only got a couple of minutes.
We're having 3 book clubs where if anybody wants to start reading any of these books, we're looking at a book club with Julia Boyd and her book, A Village in the Third Reich.
Okay.
We've also got a book club with Jackie Blosey and her book, The French House, and another book club with Amy Blakemore and the Manning Tree Witches. So 3 different books,
Okay.
very different styles to suit anybody's taste. And can I come back on and say where they're going to be? They're basically on the Friday and the Saturday in the morning and in the afternoon. And if you go onto our website, www.alderneyliterarytrust.com, and look at the program page, it'll give you all that information.
That's great. Okay. Well, once again, many, many thanks. Really enjoyed talking to you as ever. And I wish you every success with the festival. I'm sure it will go well. Thank you, Isabel.
Thank you, Tony.